Welcome everyone, and in today's video we are going to look at how to build the dominant diminished scale. In our previous video we have looked at how to build the fully diminished scale, and you'll see that this is very similar. So for one, we consider this scale to be a symmetrical scale, and we also considered it to be an octatonic scale. And the reason why we consider it to be symmetrical is because it follows the pattern of half, whole. So it's just a consistent set of half and whole steps all the way through. Okay, so as an example, if we look at the C dominant diminished scale, we'll have half, whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, whole. And if we were to extend this out, half, whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, whole, right? It just goes like that ad infinitum. And that's one of the basic reasons why we consider it to be symmetrical. Now, in terms of why is it octatonic, well, that's to me it's fairly obvious. We see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 notes. All right, so I have below written here a few octatonic scales, some of the dominant diminished scales here. So we're just going to take some observations here. Okay, ready? Here we go. The first observation that we want to make is understanding the repetition of patterns. And so, for example, if I look at the first scale here, and I'll just label this with a 1 for now. And if I look at that one, and then I'll call this one, let's say 2, and I'll call this one 3, and I'll call this one 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, and ... I could keep going on. And what I might notice is, let's see, well, let's compare 1 and how about 4? Let's compare 1 and 4. And if I notice 1 and 4, well, 1 is going to have D flat, E flat, and it'll have F sharp, and it'll have B flat. So those are kind of the alterations that we have in that one scale. Let's compare that to scale number 4, and you'll notice, hey, we have an E flat, we have an F sharp, we have a B flat, and there's our D flat over here, D flat and E flat. Now this is going to continue on, so let's kind of back up here a little bit. And so comparing scales 1 and 4, we notice that they are the same scale. And I can go on with this idea to recognize that scales 2 and 5 would be the same, that scales 3 and 6 would be the same. And if I would keep going on, I'll do it on this side, but I could also make an observation that scales 4 and 7. And so now, if I told you that 1, in this case, is going to be equal to 4, and that 4 is equal to 7, well then it's very obvious that 1 is equal to 7. So let's kind of circle some of the notes again here. We've got F sharp, B flat, D flat, E flat, and there's our F sharp. And so we start to notice this repetition of patterns in the scale. Oh, scale 1 is the same as scale 4, 2 is the same as 5, 3 is the same as 6, and then so on and so forth, right? So let's take a look at that. We have 12 notes in our chromatic scale, right? A sharp, B, C, C sharp, not double counting the flats and whatnot. And so what we can recognize is that, well, whatever note, let's say this represents A, all right? And so that means scale 1 would be the same as scale 4, which would be the same as scale 7, which would be the same as scale 10, which would be back to 1, right? If we were to continue this out, 1, 2, 3, ... and it goes on and on and on. Okay, well then that should mean that 2 is the same as 5, is the same as 8, is the same as 11, which should mean that 3 is the same as 6, is the same as 9, is the same as 12. All right, so that's something that you should kind of think about. And so if we have 12 notes in total, so we have 12 notes in total in our chromatic scale, but we notice that this thing repeats every 4, it repeats every 4 notes, right? So 12 divided by 4, it really means that we only have truly 3 dominant diminished scales. That's it. And that's kind of evident from up here, right? Because we have 1, 2, 3, repeat. 1, 2, 3, repeat. 1, 2, 3, repeat. And so we can see down here, green, pink, yellow, green, pink, yellow, green, pink, yellow, green, pink, yellow. And so hopefully by now you're starting to see, I can see why this is a a symmetrical scale. Now, really quickly, why do they call it a dominant diminished scale? And it just happens to be, it has to do with the last note that we end on, which would be this guy. And so, not to get too far ahead, but in terms of chord theory, that happens to be very useful for a dominant seventh chord. That is a minor seventh when compared to the C major scale. And that's where that dominant idea comes from. And so we have the fully diminished and the dominant diminished scales